Research shows, and those were the words that came out of my mouth when I was a young gym instructor, and I was the gym supervisor with the badge, the badge of superiority, with the bachelor degree in a gym, and I was questioned by one of my gym instructors who is actually an aerobic instructor, part-time gym instructor, and they questioned me about one of the training methods that I was using, which is a common training method that everyone did. And she came up to me, her name is Sonia, and she had this little article and it showed this little fit tip with a bit of research that stated and showed that what I was doing was not quite the best way to do it. Now, being a person in a supervisory position with a bachelor degree, young with a big ego, pretty buff back in those days, I was obviously defensive, and I brushed her comments and that research away and said, yes, that's not correct, because research shows, and what I shared was the research conclusion that confirmed my opinion, my view, and my belief. And it was something which I had adopted and taken ownership from the general mainstream of training. But what was really interesting, after I brushed her away, and I apologise to you, Sonia, for doing that back in those days. I was just a young, ignorant lad who was quite defensive and obviously insecure to a certain level. But after that, I started thinking what I said. I said, research shows. And I thought to myself, what research? At least she actually produced to me a piece of research published by a scientist, and I just brushed it off, said, most of the research shows this, but I actually didn't know what that research was. So here's a great question. When someone says research shows, does that really show, or is that just something that they're saying to defend or confirm their view, their belief, their opinion, whatever it might be? And that really triggered a curiosity in me to no longer to just say blatant statements that are not proven, and I don't know, I don't understand, I'm just saying them because everyone else is saying it. What's interesting is when I actually dug into the research based on the training modality that she questioned, I found that I was not correct. Yes, I was not correct, because there was some research back in the 1960s, but all the research since then, a good 90% of the research since then, had actually shown the opposite. But because it had been adopted by the industry as a whole and everyone's beliefs, and that's what the bodybuilders did, and that's what all the gym instructors did and the trainers did, then everyone just believed it. So just because people say research shows, that does not mean that it actually shows. So we're going to ask you to not necessarily just blankly believe other experts or industry mantras or what is generally accepted in your profession. If you want to do this, be an exercise professional for the rest of your career, the rest of your life, or it's an area that you're really interested in, that's really important to you, then how about you start digging a bit deeper into some of the statements that you believe, maybe not necessarily the ones that people say to you, but maybe you start with the ones that you've been saying to other people as a good starting point to say, hey, I say all this, but is that really true? Because there's lots of things that we say in this profession, whether it becomes to nutrition or training and the guidelines, and this exercise is better than that exercise, or when you should eat and how you should eat and how you should train and how many reps you should do and how many days a week you should train and how fast, and it's endless. And we make all these suggestions based as experts, giving expert advice, but can you actually justify what you're saying? So if I ask you, well, why are we doing this, and what research shows that, and where do you get that, and what's the anatomical physiological reason for doing that? And when I was confronted with Sonia, even though I brushed her off thinking that I got away with that, I didn't, because in my own head I thought, well, the easiest person to fool is yourself, and I just tried to fool myself by defending something which I had no deeper understanding about. So today's session is all about looking at research and what people say, and giving you some tools to evaluate your own advice that you give out, look at your own opinions and beliefs, and even go into the research and what actually makes up research, because a research study shows something, that does not necessarily make it true, because research many times is conducted to answer a question. And what you find is that many times going through the process of researching that question, you come out with a partial answer, but you come up with another 20 questions which are now unanswered. And in my journey, I went on to do my master's degree, and in that part of my master's degree, I did it by research thesis. So I actually studied elite athletes at the time in an area of training and high performance. And from that, I ended up publishing in internationally recognized scientific journals, peer-reviewed journals, my research with my co-author, Professor Robert Newton, who was my supervisor at the time. Hi Rob, if you're watching. And I learned so much in that journey, and I realized that how confined and misleading research can be if you don't understand how it works, and particularly in the interpretation of research. So let me go through basically how research operates in our field, the exercise and fitness and health area. And obviously research in different areas are going to be conducted in different ways and different types of research. You can do training studies, which I did, where I got groups of people and trained them in certain ways and compared the results that they got compared to other groups to establish which is the best training method. That's what I did. You can also have epidemiological studies where they just study big groups of people, like hundreds of thousands of people, and look at differences in these people and how they live or how they eat and how they train and just observant changes between different population groups. And there's also intervention studies where you put a nutritional intervention into the process of a group of people and see what actually happens. And there's lots of other types of research as well. So obviously I'm just going to share what I know, because I don't know everything. The more I know, the more I realise I don't know. But it should trigger a bit of thought and some questions in you to not to just blanketly and blindly and naively, if there's such a word, ignorantly just believe certain things that are floating around the industry and they start to quote research. First of all, if I have a question that I want answered and I want to conduct a research study and I conduct that study, now normally research studies are conducted in established institutions, whether it be a government agency or might be a university, because they have set protocols and policies and standards that you would have to adhere to. You have to get your research before you conduct it, have to be passed by the ethical board, and they look at it to make sure that you're doing it properly and you're not going to be hurting people or whatever it might be. So they have a whole set process to make sure that when you conduct a study it's done properly under the guidelines and the standards and the policies and the supervision of a university or government institution, whatever it might be. And yes, there are some private organisations that do it, but a lot of them come from the public university system, because that's where you research and that's where you learn, and they have lots of postgraduate students who want to study high level things, doing their master's degree, their honours degree, or maybe their PhDs or their doctorates. So first of all, if someone says research shows, you have to say, well, what research? Means, have you actually seen it? Because a lot of people say research shows, but they actually haven't seen it. And they may be referencing someone else who said research shows. So you're referencing, someone says research shows, you say research shows, you say research shows, and it's like Chinese whispers. By the time it goes through 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, they say research shows, and what they say it shows is actually not what it shows, because Chinese whispers means everyone has their own slant on what they heard from the previous person who haven't read the study. And I say this to university graduates: how many of you have done a thesis, or have you done an assignment, and you had to, in university, you have to reference the statements that you say. So if you say something, you have to reference a research study to say that what you're saying has been proven, rather than that's just your belief. And many times I say, how many people have referenced a research study that you haven't read, but you've referenced someone else's reference to that research study? It means you read it and someone referenced it, and then you took the claim from it and put it into your assignment or your project, and your references, you referenced someone else's reference. You didn't actually read it, you just took for granted that person who references had actually read it, and what they say about it is correct. And I remember in my younger days, when I was going through this process of growth, I started to look at claims out there and the references to studies they referenced, and I would go to the National Sports Information Centre in Australia. Back then we didn't have the internet, and I would actually get them through their library and resources, and they'd send me those studies. And when I read the studies, what the studies showed and what people said it showed many times was quite grey, sometimes misleading, and sometimes just not true. It varied because people will take that study to prove their point, and they take the bits they like and leave the bits they don't like, and before you know it, people are referencing a study and they're making a claim that study, but the study doesn't actually show it, which is really interesting. And that's what I found when I went through this journey, is that just don't blindly follow what people say when it comes to research shows. So first of all, we have to say what research and where was it conducted, and most importantly, where was it published? So was it published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, or a recognised scientific journal? And in the world there are, if you do research, then there's certain journals you want your research to be publishing because they're high-level journals. You know, like in medicine, it's called the Lancet. In the exercise and sport, it's called Medicine, Science, Sport and Exercise Journal, or the Strength and Conditioning Journal. These are different journals which are highly recognised internationally because, again, they have a very high peer-reviewed process, which basically means is once I've done my study through the university or institution, and it has to be very strictly done, abiding to the policies of that institution or university or institution, and I'm supervised by a supervisor who has a PhD or doctorate in that area, and there's normally a group of people doing the study because it's not just me, so it's not one person. So we're all holding each other accountable in producing correct and accurate results with integrity, and then I write up the study, which I talk about, and then I need to submit that to an international journal to be published. Means it goes into the journal so other scientists can read it. But when I submit that, then they'll take that study all written up properly, and it's quite a complex process, and then they will submit it to the editorial board, and they will pick certain people around the world who are experts in that field of study. So they will have PhDs or doctorates, so they'll be professors in that area of study, and they will go out to a group of them and they will read it, and they'll try to tear it apart. Basically, they'll try to make sure that it's done properly, and what I'm saying about it is correct according to the methodology and the results and the statistical analysis, and I have to make sure that what I'm saying, so basically it gets really pulled apart by my peers, people who are more qualified, more specialised, with higher levels of education than myself, and then it will come back and it may suggest, well, this is A, it's rubbish, throw it out, or B, yeah, it needs a lot of change, C needs a minor bit of change, D maybe a bit of tweaking. And I've been through that process, and I've had 2 papers, scientific papers, published through that process and got them published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning and Research. So yeah, so to get it actually to that stage of publication, it goes through many steps of processes to make sure that it's validated and it's correct, and what you're saying is, I'm just not saying whatever I want to say, I can only say what it actually shows, and they're high level. Now there are lots of other journals which are dodgy type journals, you know, they're not really the high level ones, and there are other things which are low level. Then there's things such as magazines and newsletters and so on. So obviously if you really want to get your research to the high level, that's where you aim for. So when people say research shows, then if you're committing your career and life to the exercise profession, it's probably a good idea just to be familiar with what are the better journals out there, and the ones that are maybe not so as good. So when research shows, what research, who did it, where was it conducted, and really most importantly, where was it published? And there's a good starting point. And if the person can't answer any of those, then you say, well, you don't really have a right to make comment about it, because you don't, and all you're doing is saying rumours about it. A rumour is something that goes from one person to another, and we know how much truth is in rumours, the Chinese whispers, and by the time you get it and you think it's research, but it's not actually research. So there's a good starting point, is just to first of all find out what is the source of that comment or that advice or whatever that might be. Now, the other way you can do it is when people say research shows and you do find a study, that's fantastic, but then you have to say, is that the only study? So just say there's 100 studies in that area and you only quote one of those studies, then you're ignoring the other 99 studies that made something which is contradictory to that one study. I always say if you have a view, an opinion, then you can always find a research study out there to back it up. But ultimately, what is the the body of evidence say, the whole body of evidence, and what does it mostly say? You may have, say, 95 studies show one thing and 5 studies show another thing. So you have to say, well, which is more the truth? Is it the 5 or the 95? So you have to take into account all the evidence and all the research. And one way to do that is to get what we call, or go for what we call reviews, literature reviews of a particular topic, or position statements. In certain organisations, such as the American College of Sports Medicine, will have position statements in different topics of nutrition, training, exercise and sports performance. And what they'll basically do is they'll get that topic, get a group of experts, PhDs, doctors, doctorates, all those types of people, and they'll go and look at all the research, put it all together, evaluate it all, and write one document that says this is what all the research shows, and this is basically our conclusion based on taking into account all the research. So that might be a good way to get started. Now, if you want to go even further than that, and you want to actually look at a study, then there's certain parts of the study you have to take into account. First of all, the main part of a study is that you have the introduction. And normally in the introduction is explaining what the purpose of the study is and what's going to study, and basically what the question is. And then there'll be a part called a literature review. So any researcher ideally will do a literature review on that topic and review all the research out there pertaining to that topic and maybe why they're designing their study this way. Then you have what we call the methodology. The methodology is how the study is conducted. How many subjects and what you got them to do and what you gave them, what are their rest intervals, and it goes through all the details of actually how you conducted the study, all the detail. And that's a really important thing to read, because many methodologies are flawed, and virtually most of them are flawed, because you can always do them better or different depending on what you're trying to answer. So methodology is important, and then you have the results, which is the most important, because the results is the truth. That's exactly what happened. Then you have the statistical analysis to make sure that those results, what you can say about those results, and I'll explain some examples later. And then you have the conclusion, and the conclusion is the author's conclusion from all of that. Now, also remember, research or studies are conducted by people or authors, and people are always going to be biased. They're going to be opinionated. No matter who you are, everyone in the world is opinionated, particularly the person doing the study, because they have a reason why they're doing it, and they're going to be biased in one way. So they're either trying to prove something or disprove something, even though they say they're neutral. But I've never come across a neutral person. When I did my studies, I went in on a biased view trying to prove something. My first study, what I tried to prove was actually disproven, which is interesting. So I actually had to have a 180-degree turn on my view of that particular study. I did what happened, or what didn't happen. I expected something to happen, but it didn't happen. But it happened on the other group, which wasn't supposed to happen. I'm like, oh my gosh, now all my beliefs were turned upside down. And even as a person, as an author, you have to be able to be prepared to switch that. And I've come across authors who've actually looked at the results, and then they've tried to tweak their conclusion based on their biasness, even though the results contradicted that. So even though what I'm saying is the conclusion and the introduction can be influenced by the prejudice of the author. Ideally, you read the methodology and the results, and that will give you the truth of any particular study. So when you've got that, then you can say, okay, some things to look for when you look at research. First of all, is the methodology relevant to the way that your question is? You may have a question of how many times a week should I train, or what's the best supplement, or there's a protein powder, or this pill, or this training method, and you ask, look, how they train them, is that relevant to the question I want? And can I take that way of training and apply it to this way of training? Because they may be completely different, and they could be minor, but it could be different. One of the studies I was questioned once, not my study, but someone said, look, I've seen the study when you look at the comparison of the lat pull down with this grip versus this grip, which is an underhand grip versus a wide overhand grip, and it was done by electromyographical studies where they put electrodes on the muscles, and one way got better results than the other. But when I actually looked at the methodology, the reason why they got better results than the other was because of the way they tested the results, how they tested it, and the protocol they used would have influenced which one would have got greater EMG readings. So I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm saying it was flawed. So you can't say it wasn't the grip, it was the way they tested it that affected the results, in my opinion, being a practitioner looking at how they tested it. So there was a flaw in the methodology, which means the conclusion now can be very much a question of which is going to be the best exercise to activate muscle activity in the latissimus dorsi via readings of EMG, or electromyographical readings by electrodes. So there can be flaws in the methodology, and obviously you're probably not going to go into the detail. I'm just saying that sometimes it isn't always what people say it is. And sometimes the methodology is completely different. Sometimes the subjects they use, the people in the study, is completely unrelated. I've seen studies with a supplement called coenzyme Q10 for aerobic fitness, and people were saying, yeah, you take this for great cardiovascular fitness and increase in aerobic capacity for elite athletes, and they quoted the study. But when I got the study didn't use elite athletes as subjects. They actually used post-surgery cardiac patients. So these people were more elderly, they had open heart surgery, and they looked at the effects of coenzyme Q10 on aerobic capacity with these post-surgery patients. But because they got an increase, because they had such a level of fitness, they got a slight increase, then people would say, yeah, this is great for elite athletes and Olympic athletes and cardiovascular for marathon runners, take this supplement. So the application of those results, the two groups, the subjects and the population who are using it, was so far distant, then one wouldn't have an effect on the other. I remember a study was a use of inosine, which is what they call the steroid replacer supplement. This showed increased testosterone levels to give you massive muscle growth, and they had people with big bodybuilders and taking this inosine, saying this will give you massive muscles. And research shows, when you actually look at the research was looking at the supplementation of inosine with menopausal and postmenopausal women, and the effects on estrogen and hormonal changes on that population group. And they found it was only in the conclusion, there was a little one-line statement that says, and we found a slight increase in testosterone. It wasn't significant, it wasn't statistically significant, because they weren't even testing it. But from that one little statement, the industry went on this bandwagon, yeah, take inosine, it's a steroid replace, it's going to increase your testosterone, put on lots of muscle. They didn't measure muscle size, they didn't do training, they didn't measure anything. They just looked at hormonal changes. So again, the application of some of these results in these studies, and they're only sometimes small results, the application can be massively exaggerated to promote yourself, or promote a supplement, or promote a training method, whatever it might be. So what I'm saying is, what you hear is not always, many times it can be completely exaggerated, it can be completely untrue, and somewhere in between. And it can be true as well if you look into it. And you probably don't have time to look into it, but I'm just sharing with you how some things can be taken completely out of, exaggerated completely. So there is obviously the methodology, the results, and then sometimes you have to look at the results. The results might be this group only got a 1% increase or a 0.5% increase in performance, yet you're saying it's going to give you a 20% increase in performance. So it may not just be a different subject group or population group, but the results might be very fine, but you're promoting it as being quite massive. This stimulates your metabolism by this much if you eat breakfast at this time, or this training will do this. And you look at the studies, and yeah, there might be a slight increase, and what caused the increase, it may not even be the training, it might be something else, and it may be the amount that it increases might be far less or far more than what you're actually saying. Because people do tend to, as you probably know, they do tend to exaggerate. Yes, they do. So there are some key things to look at. And even when you look at a position statement, then you have to look at all. A lot of times position statements, they give you guidelines. There's lots of grey areas because very few things are absolute. They're very grey, so therefore you have to be careful that people aren't making a mountain out of a molehill. For example, I use an example. Just say, for example, I wanted to promote Kman's Get Massive bodybuilding powder. And I design this powder, and I take it, and I actually put on muscle. Does that prove that it works? And I say, hey, clinical research shows, because clinical research isn't published research. Clinical means it's done in a clinic, but it could be my clinic. I'm here in beautiful Auckland at the moment on my balcony in my room, and I could call this Kman's clinic, and I take my powder and I put on increase in muscle size. And does that mean, and I can actually say now clinical research shows, because it hasn't been reviewed by my peers, it's not peer reviewed research. I'm just doing it, there's no real control, I can say whatever I want, I can control it anyway, and then I can put out a paper in Kman's sports medicine journal, and then I throw it out there and say research shows. And many times, obviously I wouldn't fool the researchers or the top level researchers in the world, but I could probably fool enough people to say, they say, well, hey, clinical research shows that Kman's Get Massive powder works. And does that prove that it works? Well, it may, but we can't say it can from a research point of view, because it might be something else that increased my muscle size. First of all, I may have been under eating before I took the powder, so my body's in a catabolic state, and then I add the powder, Kman's Get Massive protein powder, and all of a sudden I have more nutrition, therefore I'm naturally going to go into anabolic state and put on size, fat and muscle. And is that because of the magic or the herbs and spices in Kman's powder, or is that just because I'm just having more calories, therefore my body's in an anabolic state? So I can't say that. I can give it to a group of my friends and say, take this, and all of a sudden it's Kman's Get Massive protein powder, and all of a sudden they get excited because they like Kman and they promote Kman, and they take this powder and they start training, and they start living better, and they start training better, and they start sleeping better, and they start recovering better, and they start eating better, and all of a sudden they put on muscle size, and they say, hey, yeah, Kman's powder is fantastic. Does that show that Kman's powder works? No, because it might be many of those other interventing or those slightly changing, conscious or unconscious changing things in their lifestyle or their eating or their training that may put on the muscle size. So I can't say, if I give it to a group of people and it gets a result, that can't say absolutely that was true, because it might be purely placebo. It might be because they believe in it. Therefore they make it happen, because what you believe, you tend to force it to be true. So if I really want to study Kman's powder, then what I probably want to do is I want to get a group of people who take it and a group of people who don't take it. Now, if a group of people gets results and the group of people who doesn't take it doesn't get results, does that mean it works? No, because the group of people who didn't get it, they know they didn't get it. So they're saying, well, hey, we've been dodged out. And the group who got it says, we got it, therefore we've got the magic. So therefore, they may have many of those other subtle changes in their lifestyle that's going to get a result. But it may be triggered by the thought of this Kman magical powder, but it's actually something else that actually got the result. So what I need to do, if I've got two groups of people, I may have to have one give them a placebo, which I give them maybe just plain skim milk powder, and the other group I give Kman's, yes, Get Massive protein powder. Then they're both getting something, and they both think they're getting Kman's magical powder, because I put the same label on it. Therefore they're both mentally in the same boat. They say, yes, I'm getting something, I'm getting Kman's powder. So what I'm doing is I'm taking that placebo effect out by giving them both different powders. Now I find that this group gets bigger and this group doesn't. Does that mean it works? Well, no, it doesn't, because I have to make sure I control the groups, meaning this group might be all females, this group might be all males. Males put on muscle better than females. This group may have more males, this group may have less. So if I'm going to do that, I have to make sure both groups are equal. They're equal in gender, they're equal in around about their training experience, because this group may be novice people, this group might be experienced people, or novice and experienced. I have to make sure their training history is about the same, they're around about the same weight, the same levels of strength, the same body composition of muscle and fat. They have to be a reflection of each other, around about within reason. I can't have this people is 12-year-olds, this group's 30-year-olds, or this group is average weight is 50 kilograms, this average weight is 80 kilograms, because this group may have more potential to put on weight because they're lighter. So I have to take all those things that could affect the difference between one to the other. So they'll have to be around about the same, taking what they think is the same powder. Now I've got everything. Now, even with that doesn't mean it's going to work. They have to be randomly assigned. Because I'm the author, it's what we call a double-blinded study. The double-blinded study is that me being the author, I'm biased, I'm emotional. It's Kman's protein powder, remember? Kman's Get Massive protein powder. So I have to make sure that I don't influence it by my biasness or my being swayed one to the other. So double-blinded means both groups get the powder, and I don't know which group gets which. Because otherwise, if I know and I want secretly that Kman's powder to work, when this group are training, I go, come on, go a bit harder, you can go over here. I'm saying, oh yeah, you can stop now. It means I'm going to have a, whether it be conscious or unconscious, influence in the results, because I'm vested in the results. May not be financially, and it could be financially. Sometimes studies are financed by private companies, but a lot of the time I might be invested emotionally. So double-blinded means they don't know what they're getting, and the researcher doesn't know what they're getting either, and they all train and live equally. And ideally, they change nothing in their lifestyle except for the powder, the Kman's powder. You know, and they're both either experienced or they're novice. They're experienced trainers or they're novice or they've trained before. One or the other. I can't have a mixture of them, because the experienced person will get diminishing returns as compared to a novice person who will get greater returns because they've got greater potential to get better. So both groups have to be equal in gender, size, strength, all of that sort of things. They have to get what they think is the right powder. This is Kman's powder, and I can't know about it, and everything has to be equal. And then they go through maybe a 3-month training program, taking the powder. Nothing else changes in their life except for the powder. And then I might find this group's increases, but this group doesn't. Does that show that it works? No, because I have to now have to look at why did this group increase and why did this one disincrease. For example, this group may have, just say there's 10 people in it, and 2 of the people actually lost muscle size. 6 people about stayed the same, and 2 people had massive gains in muscle size. Or 1 person had massive gains in muscle size. So that massive gain on an average will, as a group, raise the average. So on the average, that group may have an increase of 1 to 2 kilograms, but most of the group didn't get any change. It's just that 2 of them got an increase of maybe 10 kilos each or 5 kilos each. Therefore, those 2 outstanding people affected all the average. And now I can say, did my Kmax protein get massive powder increase muscle size? Well, only in 2 of the 10, and 2 actually went down. But that spike affected all the rest. Why that spike would be, I don't know. It might be because they're taking some other magical formula on the side that they didn't tell anyone about. It might be because they're doing something different. Well, I don't know. But what it does is that means if I want to prove that it works, it has to be proved with all the group. Everyone has to go up around, not these outstanding ups and downs. This group may have gone up, but 2 people may have come right down that actually brought the whole amount down. So that's where the statistical analysis of a study will start to look at those things. And even though there's an increase, it's not significant. It's not statistically significant, because statistics shows, well, that's out of shape. You can't say that this increases muscle size. Kman's get massive powder increases muscle size, because there's a very unequal increase in muscle size for whatever reason. The reason doesn't matter, but to show that it works across the population, you have to show that it works across the whole group within a range, and it's similar. Everyone increases about the same. Everyone here stays about the same. So if I get to the stage where this group increases maybe 1 to 2 kilograms of lean muscle mass, and this group doesn't increase, then, and that's statistically significant, then I can say, yes, Kman's get massive protein powder works. Then I write up my study, and then I put it into, with my colleagues, my co-authors, my co-researchers. We make sure it's valid, we make sure it has integrity. Then I issue it to a journal for critique, and that gets issued to people with PhDs and scientists, world-leading scientists, and they will go through it to make sure that I'm not saying things that I shouldn't be saying. I'm not exaggerating it. I'm not saying things that are not true. And I remember one of the studies, one of my studies, I made this statement that the reason maybe they didn't get results because they didn't have feedback on their performance. I was looking at medicine board training in performance and power and speed. And the editorial board came back and says, yeah, you can't say that. Can you reference a research studies that show that you can? Now, to me, common sense means if you get feedback on performance, that will motivate you to beat your performance. Well, that's common sense. Remember, this is research. It's not common sense search, it's research, which means now I had to go and find a study, or a number of studies to validate that statement that I made from a scientific point of view. And I came up with a study by an author called Brown and colleagues who came up with a study with feedback. I won't go into the details, and then I had to put that in the study for me to keep that statement in the study. They say you have to prove it or remove it. And it was in my conclusion to why one group didn't get the results they got, because I had to hypothetically say why they got the results and hypothetically why the other group didn't get results. But even if I say hypothetically, I still have to validate it through research. So I know this seems like quite a complex process, and yes, when you get research published in internationally recognised peer-reviewed scientific journals, the only people who read it are other scientists, because the general population don't read it. And when it gets released through a magazine or the media or social media, many times the conclusions can be exaggerated, taken out of proportion, and sometimes can be go through so many Chinese whispers. By the time it gets to you, it's just not true. So my point being is, if there's a topic of area of interest that's really important to you, whether it be for your profession as an exercise professional, whether it be for your health, whether it be for your performance or your sport, whatever it might be, if it's really important, what I'm saying is, don't just take other people's word for it. Don't just just because they say research. Don't believe the news. The news is the views, because the views many times exaggerate stuff and only shows a small proportion of what the truth is, because most news are biased, whether it be politically biased or socially biased, whatever bias it might be. So take ownership of your own knowledge and gather all the knowledge. If this is an area of interest, an area that's important, an area which is going to add value to your life, then take the time, rather than reading dribble or reading other people's views on things, go to the source, go to what we call the horse's mouth, and then you'll be quite enlightened, where either you find that, hey, your view is validated and proven, or you may find, well, mate, that's what I'm saying is not quite true, or it's exaggerated, or many times it's just not true. I hear so many untruths in this profession that are shared with such confidence. They're just confidently wrong, and sometimes they're very sincere, so they're sincerely, confidently wrong when they say things, and they will say research shows, and I know very much they haven't read any research, because they wouldn't know where to find the research. All they're doing is taking other people's quotes and other people's opinions, and they're becoming an expert in other people's opinions. So if you want to call yourself an expert is not an expert in other people's opinions. It's an expert in all the information that you gather and the knowledge that you gather from both sides and all sides, and you put it all collectively, and you come up with your own view, so you can make a proper recommendation with confidence that is closer to the truth than just taking other people's opinions. So hopefully that's helpful for you as an individual, as an exercise professional, to seek the truth, because the truth will set you free. See you in the next Kmax.